Act allowed women to vote if they were over the age of 30 and met a property qualification. At the same time, the Parliament Qualification of Women Act in 1918 gave women over 21 the right to stand for election as MPs, which was momentous, although it did mean that between 1918 and 1928, women were in the odd position of being able to stand for Parliament but unable to vote. Jenny Lee was 23 when she stood as the North Lanark Labour candidate in the 1929 by-election, just before the rules were changed. The class of 1918 are those women who either prepared the ground for or immediately benefited from the burst of empowerment which followed getting the vote. For Western women, 1918 is the start of the modern era. Just as historians use the term the long 12th century as shorthand for the period between 1050 and 1250, a way of rationalising the massive changes that occurred in those 200 years, so you can argue that for women the 20th century started later than it did for everyone else and hasn't yet ended. Not until 1928 was the voting franchise in Great Britain and Northern Ireland extended to all women over the age of 21, finally giving them the vote on the same terms as men. To make sense of the modern era, you need to understand the years which immediately preceded it. So my history includes women who predate even first-wave feminism, the activist Ada Neale Chu, for example, and Octavia Hill, whose National Trust for Places of Historic Interest or Natural Beauty arose out of her campaigning for better quality housing for the poor. That women have the same rights and opportunities as men is practically a given for my two young daughters. They watch Channel 4 News, see me interviewing what must seem like an endless procession of female politicians, bankers, lobbyists, CEOs, etc. The fact that a little over 100 years ago most British women couldn't even vote is scarcely credible to them. They have only the vaguest notion of what today's modern successful women have inherited from their forebears, of what they need to be thankful for, of how painfully slow the process of being taken seriously has been, and indeed continues to be. This is where the idea of women's history comes in. Do we still need such a thing? We certainly did. The first 1885 edition of the prestigious Dictionary of National Biography found room for only 3% of women in its 62 volumes, and I would argue we still do. Of course, the danger of gathering together the experiences of so many different women, black, white and Asian, straight or LGBTQ+, is that the specificity of those experiences to those particular women gets overlooked. They may have trodden similar paths and faced similar pitfalls, but oppression comes in many shapes and sizes. Even primary school children now learn that the kind of discrimination Florence Nightingale had to overcome as a wealthy, upper-middle-class, well-connected Englishwoman was very different to that experienced by her fellow nurse Mary Seacole as a mixed-race woman, a mulatto in the language of the day, who identified as both Scottish and Jamaican. I've done my best in what follows to bear this in mind. This is not a textbook. I've tried to write about these remarkable women in an accessible and entertaining way. At its heart, though, are two basic questions. What were the sources of female power in the 20th century? And what have women used this power to achieve? The answers are complex because female power is complex. Even if we accept that for much of human history, women have conducted their lives in a patriarchal bubble, subordinate in law, custom and religion to the men around them, not even wanting equality with men, so ridiculous did the idea seem, it doesn't mean they lacked purpose and agency. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't celebrate their achievements. As modern women, we are instinctively drawn to a certain species of trailblazer, the women it's easy and satisfying to claim as proto-feminists. But not all of them would be pleased to wear the T-shirt. Take the 18th century writer and philanthropist Hannah More for starters. It was fine, she thought, to teach poor women to read so that they could understand the Bible. But she was shocked by women she'd heard about in France who run to study philosophy and neglect their families to be present at lectures in anatomy. And she loathed the sort of education reforms proposed by Mary Wollstonecraft. How many ways there are of being ridiculous! When the explorer Mary Kingsley returned from the second of her expeditions to West Africa in October 1895, she distanced herself from the new women then being discussed in newspapers, arguing that women's suffrage was a minor question. While there was a most vital section of men disenfranchised, women could wait.